Maps are an object that associates keys and values. These are sometimes called dictionaries in other languages like Python, or they're referred to more formally as hash maps. Both keys and values can be any type of object. Each key occurs only once, but you can use the same value multiple times. Dart support for maps is provided by map literals and the map type. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, essentially, you create a new variable, for example, gifs here, and then you have key value pairs. So the keys are on the left-hand side of the colon, and the values, which remember can be something like a list or a number or really any data type, are on the right-hand side of the colon. And then you separate out these key value pairs with commas. Notice that these are similar to sets in the fact that they use the same curly braces constructor, but the key value pairs and the item construction is slightly different. Let's go ahead and build an example of a map inside of Dartpad and by creating a variable called employees. So in what kind of instances are we going to want to use a map instead of something like a list or a set? Well, it makes a lot of sense to use a map when you want to be able to look up a value based off a string key. That is probably the most common use case for maps. So let's imagine I wanted to track how many years employees have been employed at my company. In that case, a key value pair makes a lot of sense. I'll have the name of the employee, such as David, and then a colon for the associated value, such as 10 years. And then I can keep adding these key value pairs separated by a comma. And you could do this all in one line, or you can build it out into multiple lines. For example, I could have Claire, who's worked at the company for 5 years, and then maybe we have Calvin again, who let's say worked at the company for 3 years. And if it's the last item, you technically don't need a comma after the last item, but it's not an error if you do put a comma there after the last item. Something to be careful of when you're working with maps is keeping track of these curly braces. You tend to use curly braces a lot, especially as we begin to use things like functions and code, so indentation might start helping you realize where things are at, or most text editors actually allow you to collapse these sort of things with the lines that they're associated with. So you can build it out and then collapse it to try to clean up your code and keep track of where things are. So I want you to keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and print out the employees and make sure you put a semicolon here at the very end of this line that closes off the end of that map. So I'm going to run this. Let me bring over the console too. And I can see now I have my map. Now, what if I want to grab an item from the map? Let's say I wanted to understand how many years has David been there. Well, now I don't need to memorize any position for David like I would have to with a list or something like that. Instead, I can say, actually, let me just say print. I can say employees and then just pass in to square braces David. So in the same way you would pass in an index position to a list, with a map I can just pass in the key I'm looking for and I'll get back the value. So if I say print employees David, I should now see 10 as the second line there. And there it is. Perfect. Now keep in mind, keys that are not present in the map will return a null. So you're not going to get an error if you ask for an employee that isn't in this map. So for example, if I ask for Jose, which is not defined in that map, and if I run this, it doesn't produce an error. Instead, it says this is null. And something to keep in mind, we're going to talk a lot more about null types and null safety later on in the course, but I do want you to keep that fact in mind. Now let's say you want to add an item to the map. That's pretty easy. All you need to do is refer to the item as if it already exists. For example, Z is an employee that we know isn't there yet. And then if I want to add it, I just assign it a value, like 100 years. And then I can print out employees to see the effect of that change. So let's go ahead and run that. And there's my original dictionary, 10 years for David, null value for Jose, and then here is the final dictionary with Z 100 years. And something to keep in mind is the way these hash tables or hash maps work is you're technically not guaranteed any sort of order to David, Claire, Calvin, and Z. If you did want to use an object type where sorting and ordering was kind of a necessary component for you, that's when you should consider something like a list, since you already know you can refer to those by index position. There's not really a way I can say grab the last item in this map. It doesn't really work that way. Okay, so that's it for this lecture. Let's go ahead and test your skills in a map exercise coming up next.